Last week we took a good look at the Hellriegel, an Austro-Hungarian prototype SMG that really set the road ahead for the production of such weapons, even though it technically didn't see any action at all in any wars. Today we follow in the same vein, looking at a weapon that pioneered something that others would use as a basis for weapons we see today. This week on Battlefield 1 Weapon History, we're going to be looking at the Danish Madsen machine gun. Now, before we get stuck into the history of this weapon, we're going to be looking at what the weapon does in Battlefield 1. Now, some people last week got a little bit annoyed that the video wasn't totally devoted to the history, but I've decided to keep some of the video game information in here because, well, I do think it's relevant. The Madsen is of course available to the support kit in Battlefield 1, and each of the 3 variants costs 200 war bonds for you to unlock. The Trench, Low Weight and Storm all have their advantages and disadvantages, but one constant factor across all 3 is the rather large protruding magazine that sticks out the top of the weapon's body. This creates a rather large obstruction of view, but with a little bit of practice in that situation it is very easy to adjust to. The Trench variant focuses on hipfire usage, the Storm offers lower vertical and horizontal recoil values, which are better for longer range engagements, and the low weight version offers a faster recovery from the recoil and bullet spread once you finish firing, and it comes fitted with a bipod as well. For an on-the-move support player, having the Storm variant in your hands is going to be much more beneficial, as keeping that recoil down on longer range gunfights is going to be a big benefit, especially when you come up against the much more powerful medic weapons. The upside is that you'll be dealing a lot of suppression to any target at medium range. That's the value of the LMGs. They're designed to really have the upper hand there. When it comes to close quarters, with the fire rate only reaching 540 rounds a minute, you're not going to have much luck beating shotguns or submachine guns, but you might stand a chance with the Trench version to take advantage of that increased hipfire accuracy. The low weight option is really for the player who likes to hold down pathways or areas of the map. For example, setting up in the mountains on Mont Grappa, bipoded at the end of the path, and providing covering fire for all of your teammates as they try to push against the enemy. The reduced amount of time it takes for the recoil and the spread of those bullets to reset after you've stopped firing does make it a viable option for this task. But with the low bullet count in the magazine, just 30 and 1 in the chamber, it does leave much to be desired if you're looking for continuous fire potential. You'd be far better off here with the MG15 or the Lewis gun. The Madsen in Battlefield 1 is really a mobile machine gun with the potential to operate as a convenient placement if you need it to. The Storm variant is probably the strongest of the 3 options you have here, and if you're looking to keep on the move all the time, that reduced recoil due to the attached grip is going to serve you very, very well. But how does the Madsen in Battlefield 1 stack up against its real-life counterpart? Is it equivalent, or have DICE gone down that creative path again and switched things up a bit? Let's find out. So first off, let's look at how the Madsen actually came to be. Jointly developed by Julius Rasmussen and Theodor Skobel in the late 1890s, the weapon was designed to be adopted into the Danish army. Now, the name of the weapon comes from the then Danish Minister of War. He was called Wilhelm Hermann Oluf Madsen, which is a rather odd name, and in 1902, the first Madsens were deployed into the Danish army. The design of the weapon was fairly unconventional for its time. It used a fully automatic system of the falling block action, which at the time was a system that other guns did use, although not in an automatic variant. The falling block action is, in simple terms, a single piece of metal sat between the round to be fired and the barrel of the gun. The metal slides vertically down when the lever on the weapon is pulled, ejecting that round into the barrel. The metal block then slams back up again to maintain the pressure inside the body needed to fire the next round. Many weapons designed in the later half of the 1800s used this system, but incorporating that and adding to it into a fully automatic weapon was something that hadn't ever been done before, and considering the complexity of this system, it made the Madsen a very expensive piece of kit for the designers to produce. What this expense gave way to, though, is now what's considered to be the first true light machine gun that was ever produced in large quantities. The Madsen was an extremely reliable weapon as well, as the complexity of the system that it used to fire its bullets didn't allow the weapon to have a high rate of fire. This kept the weapon cool and allowed the designers to leave the cooling of the weapon to the air alone. No water cooling system was needed for this light machine gun. The reliability of the weapon, despite its high unit cost, did attract the attention of a lot of potential buyers, and this allowed the designers to modify the weapon to suit different buyers' needs. Now overall, 34 different countries with armed forces bought the gun, and around a dozen different calibers were made to fit the weapon as well. Those buyers began to come in around the start of the 20th century, but they continued well beyond that. The Russians bought 1,250 Madsens to fit onto their monoplanes that were used during the Russo-Japanese War. They fired them over the top of the propellers. And the Germans bought into the design as well and deployed the Madsen with infantry units in 1914, the outbreak of the First World War. That initial reliability was proven for the Madsen, and in the long run, it saw use all over the world. In the early 1930s, Paraguay bought the weapon to arm its troops for a war with Bolivia over disputed lands. Bolivia ended up deploying the Madsen against Paraguay during the same conflict. Brazil acquired some units from the Italian army in the 1930s as well, using them as mounted guns on top of their military vehicles. The Madsens were still in use during World War II as well. Norwegian infantry squads were all assigned one Madsen machine gun each, although the weapon in that caliber that they were supplied kept jamming after a few rounds had been fired. German armed forces continued to take delivery of the Madsen until 1942 and used the weapon for second-line units throughout the entire war. And the Danish army didn't actually retire the Madsen from service until 1955. After World War II, the Portuguese army used Madsen machine guns during the colonial war in the 1960s and 70s, and if you really needed any more evidence of its popularity, the Madsen is still in use today by the Brazilian police force. Even though the weapon was technically retired in 1996, I'm sure its use wasn't officially sanctioned. The Madsens they used were ones handed down by the Brazilian army or captured from drug traffickers. The last sighting of the Madsen used by the Brazilians was in April 2015, when police forces clashed with criminals in neighbourhood areas. The Madsen was first introduced into the Danish army in 1902, and its last sighting during combat was in April 2015. That's 103 years of service around the world. That's pretty staggering. It's safe to say that the Madsen has had an extremely long history of use in conflict, and I think DICE have reflected its original workings very well here in Battlefield 1. The point at which we can say the real-life use and the game actually link is the outset of the war, where plenty of forces from both the Central Powers and the Allied forces took interest in the gun and set about deploying them in various units across the fronts. By combining an already reliable action and automatic fire, Danish designers created a very reliable weapon. So much so, I'm sure there's still one sitting in an armory somewhere in a Brazilian police station. So there you go, the Madsen MG. I think DICE have done a great job here at modelling the gun after what it was really like in World War I. And if you want to be a mobile support player, then this MG is definitely one you should consider. Thank you very much for watching. Let me know what you think of the Madsen down below in the comments, and let me know what weapon you want to be featured on Battlefield 1 Weapon History next week. But until then, my name is Westie, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.